Hey viewers, my name's Kara. I'm your host for Tuesdays on the Pagan Perspective, and this week we have two questions from two different people, and they're both talking about paganism and drug use education. The exact questions will be below. Pardon me, I woke up with a sore throat, scratchy throat. It's sort of getting to be that season where I'm gonna have this issue with the dry air. But anyway, really quick, I'm not really ready to start this video entirely. I'm probably going to record it later today, but I wanted to show you what happened when I first just googled drug education for pagans, and the first non-sponsored link that shows up is a Christian research page. It's called Public Education or Pagan Indoctrination, and the little preview that it gives of the text talks about guidance counseling, gifted sex and drug education programs, and then it goes on, of our country into humanism and paganism and the resultant culture wars. And I'm like, oh, okay, what's this article about? So I look it up, and it's a really super long article. Like, it just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. I'll put a link to it in case you want to check it out, but I probably will not read the whole thing right now because it's so long. But it's about how public education is including things that they consider new age practices. Like, there was an example of a young girl being picked on by her brother, and her parents noticed that she was being uncharacteristically calm about it, and they found out it was because she said she was closing her eyes and picturing in her mind a happy place, and instead of being annoyed by her brother picking on her, she was able to relax doing this sort of meditation thing. And people are really not happy with that sort of thing being taught to children in schools as a coping mechanism and things like that. And the article talks about, if they're learning these things, then are they also teaching our kids that they can make autonomous decisions about what's right and wrong, such as whether or not to use drugs or have sex? And I'm just like, wow, yeah, because meditation is totally the same thing as telling your kids that they can decide to do drugs and have sex, but whatevs. And a few links down on the search page is a documentary called Pagans, and the little preview text there says, is paganism a living tradition with roots deep in prehistory, or just a collection of, and then it skips, your life, go for it, but don't expect educated, objective people to pay it any attention, and then it skips, at the same time with different sexes, and yes, they do drugs and drink. So I'm like, well, that is a super cool thing to be happening in a documentary about pagans, but then I don't actually see that in the description of the documentary. This is the page for it. I don't actually see that here, so I'm guessing that those quotes probably came from the user comments below, which are always fun, but I'll put a link to that as well, just because that's what came up when I searched for drug education for pagans. These are the things that came up. And then all the way down at the bottom of the search page, the last thing on the first page of results was paganwiccan.about.com, an article by Patty called Drug and Alcohol Use, a Pagan Perspective. So that is probably the most useful article in this case. So anyway, I'll probably actually get to doing this video later, which you will see now. Okay, I'm ready. So addressing the first question, are there people in the pagan community that work to educate their brothers and sisters about drugs? I tried some simple Googling and I couldn't find anything that was about specifically educating pagans about drug education and drug use. There are articles about, like I said, paganwiccanAbout.com article about drug use in pagan ritual. There's that kind of thing. But as far as, for example, something like AA specifically for pagans, I couldn't find anything about that right away, and I've never heard of anything like that, although I've definitely had people ask me about it before, especially since, for example, I never really even knew that AA was a Christian-centered group, which is kind of dumb, because once you look it up and you actually read their whole, the steps of the program, it has a lot to do with God, but I just had never had any reason to read it before. So my boyfriend and I were watching an episode of some crime show where they were talking about AA and talking about how much it has to do with God, and we were both like, what? And so that's when we found out that that's what it is. And from then on, I actually did have several people ask me, is there a pagan version of anything like this? Because what if a pagan wants to go to a group like this and get some help, but they don't like it being a Christian basis? There are a lot of pagans, I'm sure, that go to groups that are Christian-based because they're the only groups that exist. And who should be working toward having groups for pagans? pagans, because we're the ones that need them. So I think it depends on that being a big enough movement. I don't know of any so far, so I guess I'm turning this over to the rest of you watching this. Do you know of any pagan groups or any pagans out there individually who work to educate other pagans, or even just their peers in general, about drug abuse and drug education from a pagan point of view, for pagans, by pagans, or for everyone, just from a pagan perspective? I want to be able to spend more time on that question, but I don't know as much about it. I couldn't find any information about it right away, and I don't know anything about it. But definitely, I think it also has to do with us educating each other. For example, the person asking the question has had personal experiences, bad experiences with drugs. And so I think it really does depend on those people taking the time to put it out there and making sure that people are hearing about these things. I, for example, have not had that many experiences with it, so what I have to say, while it may be helpful for some people, it might be helpful for some kids to hear, you know, I've never done that kind of thing, so not everyone does it, you don't have to do it. It may be even more helpful for those people who are struggling with it to hear from someone else who has struggled with it. So I think that's really what it depends on, is us actually going out there and doing it and creating those groups and creating those things. The other question is, so with the rise of popularity in religious movements like Rastafari, which feature marijuana, alcohol, or other drugs in their religious rituals, I would like to hear if any of you have ever practiced / heard of / thought about Wiccan or pagan rituals involving mind-altering substances. Have we ever practiced it? I have never practiced a ritual or spellcasting or any sort of thing that involved alcohol or drug use in the working. Several of my rituals included drinking a glass of wine as part of the simple feast or communion, cakes and ale, at the end, but not at all during the actual working. So it wouldn't be like, oh, I got drunk and then did this thing. It was, we did the thing sober, and then at the end we had a glass of wine as part of cakes and ale to celebrate, just as part of grounding and communion. Just about the only other relevant thing that I have ever practiced is when my friends and I would go out for hookah, and usually, once we had gotten a little bit buzzed, we would do energy work. That's just about the only other thing I've ever actually practiced while not fully in my usual sober capability. Have I ever heard of or thought about Wiccan or pagan rituals involving mind-altering substances? Yes, and actually right now I'm reading a book called Modern Pagans, which is a collection of interviews of all different sorts of pagans, and a lot of them talk about how some of their first experiences in the religion were acid trips, and they were stoned at the time, and all these other things. And so, like, there was one specifically, I don't remember who it was, but I remember reading about someone talking about their personal initiation, their self-dedication, the way that they initiated their journey. They took an acid trip and went and got these, and then there's a lot of people talking about, the question is, how did you come up with this concept for your church that you started, and how did this become part of your life? And they're like, oh, I took an acid trip and the universe was revealed to me, and that's how it happened. So while I personally have no desire to go and take an acid trip to become more aware of the universe, to a certain extent I have to realize, holy crap, a lot of them did that, and that's how these things came to be. These things that influenced what I'm able to do now as a pagan in this country, and the rights that we have, and the organizations that exist, are because of those experiences that those people had. So I've definitely thought about and heard about, and it wasn't always necessarily rituals, though. I'm not saying that they talked about, oh yes, in our rituals we all get stoned and do this, or whatever. It was just individual experiences that these people had. None of it that I read about said that it was part of a group ritual or part of a celebration or anything like that. It was all just personal individual experiences with drugs that led them to these things. So it's not unheard of, but I also know that as time progressed and more people became addicts and became alcoholics, and people are going through these recovery programs, a lot of groups now are specifically alcohol-free. They won't even have that glass of wine at the end of ritual for communion because it's for recovering alcoholics and they don't want that involved in it. And so there are a lot of groups that specifically choose not to include drugs and alcohol because of that. And then the other argument about not using drugs and alcohol in ritual or in spellcasting or anything like that which I think is a good one, is that it does alter your consciousness, which is the point of why some people take it. But as far as if you want to go into a ritual, or if you want to do an extreme difficult magic working that requires focus, then you don't want to be altering your consciousness in such a way that takes your focus away. You don't want to be not in your full capacity of your mental capability at that point. It's just, it doesn't help you. So for example, while I do like to have that glass of wine at the end of ritual or with my dinners and things like that, I would not want to try to do a ritual drunk. Like actual, like alcohol drunk. I mean, there's different kinds of feeling drunk, feeling high on life, things like that, you know. It sounds very cliche, but it's true. I've had completely sober experiences that felt high or drunk because of different experiences and just the way that I open my mind to things. It has a different sort of reaction, but I was actually completely sober. You know? But I don't think I would actually want to imbibe enough alcohol to become drunk and then try to do a ritual. I think that would be disrespectful for me personally, and I don't think it would work very well. There are other people who do it, and you'd have to just ask them about it, but I know that that is my personal opinion and the general opinion of a lot of sources that you read. Lots of people talk about that. But I don't know, I don't want to say that you're a bad person or you're a bad pagan if you decide to do that. I just personally don't think it's the best way of going about it for me. And I don't think that those things are necessary as part of a pagan ritual or anything like that. I don't think that anyone should be told, you have to do this in order to do this ritual, you have to do this in order to be whatever. I think it's, you know, if you can do those things sober, that says so much. And for example, the people that I was reading about in the interviews, if they had to do that, you know, the first time to really have their minds opened to it because they just couldn't have comprehended the world in such a way had they not been on an acid trip, that's one thing, but they can experience that thing over and over and over after that while sober because they already have that concept, you know? So I personally feel that learning these things and doing these things sober has a much greater effect for you and what you can do in the future. It's just like how I say that tools are great, but I feel that if you can learn to do certain things, like casting a circle or any number of things without tools, just with your own mind and body, then that puts you at a much greater advantage because you can do these things without anything else, whether it be tools or drugs or alcohol or what have you. But no, I don't know if there's anyone out there educating pagans about drug abuse education, and I don't know if there are any groups out there right now who actually do get drunk and do ritual or get high and do ritual. But these are very good questions, and I hope that some of you might know more about it, or this leads to us finding more answers. Really big topic. Thank you so much for asking, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Until I see you again, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye, and stay safe. Bye.